Let's
Powered by Reveting, streaming from the Reveting Digital Studio. It's the David Daily. Exploring frontier technology, artificial intelligence, quantum innovation, and the intersection of faith, funding, and the future. Here's your host, David Goki.
Welcome to episode 40 of the David Daily Show. I'm incredibly excited to be here. Today, we are going live on all major platforms. LinkedIn Live is our most favorite platform for so many reasons. We are live here on the David Daily Show, coming to you occasionally and sometimes daily. We have a special guest today. I'm excited for this guest. And in fact, I just want to let you know that if you're tuning in for the very first time on the David Daily Show, please check us out on Apple Podcast and Spotify Creator Podcast, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We are on all major platforms. And I just want to say too, if you're considering going live, please send me a direct message. I would love to help you personally with your own creator journey. So we're going to get right into it with our special segment when we have guests of funding, faith, and future tech. I'm very excited for today's guest for many reasons. First of all, Dr. Katrina is not only a Harvard graduate, but she is also a graduate of the George Washington University, getting a doctorate in engineering and cybersecurity, graduating cum laude. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show today. Dr. Katrina, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having me. And I'm not a graduate of Harvard. I've done programs there, but I have a doctorate of engineering from George Washington. But thank you for the introduction.
Yes, thank you for your humility and the correction there. I am also having a picture of Harvard Business School in Spain. I've been to Massachusetts and Cambridge taking some exploratory classes myself. It's always good to learn from the free information and knowledge, especially from Ivy League schools. So shout out to Harvard. If you're thinking about taking some free classes there, please do so, or getting a Harvard business degree. Of course, we want to shout out to all of our Harvard business folks watching. Okay, so Dr. Katrina, if you can mind just introducing who you are and a little bit about where you are today and the types of people that you serve today.
Absolutely. So as you mentioned, I have a doctorate of engineering in cybersecurity from George Washington, class of 26. Yay. So basically a little background on me. I'm a chairwoman of the Civilian Reserve, CR-ISAC. And one of the things that we do with CR-ISAC as a nonprofit organization that came to fruition after the Major General that chose to start this nonprofit after meeting with the Ukrainian counterparts was because we wanted to make sure that our country, our states are better prepared, and when, not if, I always say, we have a cyber security attack on our land when it comes to our utilities, our critical infrastructure, hospital systems, water, so that we have the right vetted skill set ready to go and step in when the rest of the country is trying to figure out what just happened. So I'm very proud of being part of that organization. I'm the chairwoman of it. I'm also the founder of KRR Ventures Advisory, where I advise a lot of startups in the emerging tech space, from quantum, cybersecurity, AI, and I'm about to launch the Queen's Gambit, and that's Queen's GMBT Gambit, focusing on these types of sectors in emerging tech that create impact in the world and being able to help the founders and those innovative companies push forward. So I have a lot of exciting projects and work I do, including heavily involved with the quantum governance piece, where I've built and created a framework in the space to get enterprise, and including small companies all the way through large enterprises, better prepared for getting a handle on their quantum risk.
I absolutely love that. It is a true honor and blessing to have you on the show and to showcase the things you really care about. You're a natural on camera, you're very intelligent, Of course, you're easy on the eyes, and people are already tuning in, over 50 people across all platforms. So it's great to have you here. Let's dive into the very first topic. I'm excited about this topic. We have 3 topics on this show. So get a HNDL, aka handle on your quantum risk. What should
Yeah.
companies and businesses, individuals be thinking about this? I recently, by the way, read an article that said we have about 18 to 24 months for all organizations to quote unquote be quantum ready in terms of quantum risk and security. What does that mean for the business owner today?
I'm extremely passionate about this topic because there's been so much, David, as you mentioned, I'm glad you brought that up, the 18 to 26 months. There are heavy hitting CEOs in our country and globally that have said it's 15 years out. The reality of it is we're putting too much emphasis on time when we should be focusing on preparedness and resilience. And what does that really mean to any company? So smaller companies might think, hey, how is this going to affect me? It's not something I should even think about. And that's actually a very scary thing to consider. I read a statistic that it said 94% of organizations today are not prepared for for quantum. And what does that mean from a risk level? They're not ready for the risks that are tied to quantum. So today, what's going on is that our adversaries are harvesting our data. And I'll come back to what that data means as an organization. But they're harvesting it and sitting on it today. So everyone's making this issue about the future and pushing it out. And that's the piece that I want to really address here, is that quantum is not a future risk, it's a today risk. So the HNDL stands for harvest now, decrypt later. And that means that these adversaries, our enemy states ranging from Russia, China, Iran, etc., they are the breaches that they're conducting. They're living off our land. They're taking our information and sitting on it so that when quantum is viable, then they are able to decrypt it. And that's a really big risk, because you may be an organization or a company today that sits on PII, personal information, healthcare records, medical, legal, M&A information, government, military, and you may not know that your information has already been harvested until quantum's viable. And that's when all of it comes out and everyone's going to be having to address it and deal with it.
Right. Yeah, I'm really glad that you bring that up. So to put this in layman's terms, you have a USB drive like this, and what your adversaries are doing is downloading your encrypted data on this device. Why does it matter? Because once they have a copy of that encrypted data, then they can decrypt it later with quantum. What does that mean? Your 256-bit character encryption today on a device like this, I can save your hash codes, your Bitcoin wallet ID, your security on a device. And then later, when I have the supercomputer technology, we will be able to decrypt that at scale. And if you haven't changed your security, then at that point, your security will be at risk. So to keep this so simple, you need to be quantum ready and have a quantum first infrastructure that prioritizes that internally and just says, oh yeah, the internal quantum security is so important. So I really appreciate that perspective. I'd love to hear a little bit more about the practical aspect of what are the first couple of steps an organization can take to be able to be quote unquote quantum risk ready.
Great question. So, we went through this entire, and we are still going through, AI governance. What does AI mean for companies? And I've had the opportunity to sit with a lot of C-suite CEOs of small mid-cap companies. Typically, they're the ones that have less resources than the larger enterprises, and they're having to still deal and address the same risks and new challenges of emerging technologies. And being in those rooms, I've noticed that, these companies and folks are trying to still catch up with how to implement AI governance. And we have had NIST and other government entities that have come out with AI frameworks. And so that piece of it spoke to me when it comes to quantum preparedness and readiness. So I believe that having a quantum governance strategy and framework to implement at any level, whether you're a small business, medium size, or a large enterprise, you should be prepared. So implementing a governance strategy is going to be a very useful tool for being better prepared. And what does that really mean? So I came up with a framework called the Quantum Queen framework for, and it's an acronym for the quantum governance piece. And one of the first things that really you need to know is, as far as your assets, like, are you at risk? How long do you need your data and your information to live in secret, right? To simplify this. So if you have healthcare records, there are regulatory mandates from HIPAA and so forth that require you to keep that information, that PII information of patients and so forth, confidential for a long duration of years. Financial records, government defense, intellectual property, and so forth and so on. All of that information, if you have anything to do with it, then you are at risk. And so you should have a governance strategy in place so that your C-suites, your boards, your et cetera, are all aligned and they know that they have taken the right steps and approach to be better prepared. First step, David, you asked, what could you do? I'll give you a little tidbit based on my own framework. Know your data and the longevity of it. So how long you have to have certain information, what is encrypted today, where the risks are there. Be aware of that information, because if you don't know, how are you going to really be ready and prepared or even have a plan? So
that's so good. If you don't know the risks of a danger.
Yeah, I was just saying, I hope that was a little more simple in explaining it, because I know some of this stuff can be very technical, and I like to make sure that we're able to all digest this, not just technical people.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're technical, you're also well trained, but you also have a team as well that comes in and implements these strategies. So let's just play this out a little bit. So previously, I was at Microsoft for 10 years. We built 3 security products there while I was tenured at Microsoft. I have a large West Coast audience that watches this. Secondly, we also talked about how to be cybersecurity ready and also both defensively and offensively, right? You want to have both red teams and blue teams. For those of you just tuning in, that means you need a good offense and a good defense. For example, just this week, we had the Super Bowl in the United States. Go Seahawks. We have a big victory underneath our win. So from a cybersecurity point of view, when you're talking to a board of directors, especially investors and shareholders, to make sure that their investments are safe, leaning into that quantum queen framework, how do you really approach a board of investors to say, look, you could be investing in revenue scale, you could be investing in people, you could be investing in marketing and sales. What is the value prop for a board of directors or a set of investors to be investing in quantum, which could potentially be a longer term investment and not necessarily something driving short-term profits?
So, what's funny about that last piece you said, David, I don't think that it's a long-term investment. I think that because the harvest now is already happening, it's a now and yesterday investment. Because you may not even know that your information, your data has already been harvested. And so why take that risk? And what does that risk mean to you from a financial angle? So I always make it a business case, because it's not a cybersecurity issue only. I mean, obviously it's a security issue, but it's not just a cybersecurity issue to your company, to your entity, to that data. And it's not just that transaction. It's basically a risk to your entire company, as well as a national security risk. Because there is something, as you and I know, in cybersecurity, lateral movement. Things can move laterally once they've breached, and they can go into systems and take certain types of information, data, and save it for harvesting it later if it's encrypted. So I believe that the way that I today, and I am doing that today, actually, I've gotten in front of one of the largest pension funds in the United States. And I have spoken on this topic to them about the risks of cyber as well as quantum from a PQC angle and what that means. And I've asked them to do this exact same thing, which is do an assessment, to do look at your portfolios and the managers that are investing in these types of companies and critical infrastructure, and see what are they doing? Do they have a governance strategy already implemented? And if not, are they ready? So I think between the boards that we're getting in front of, as well as the regulatory landscape and the insurance companies that are catching on to this more and more, they know there's a major risk here to our companies, organizations, to our economy, and they want to get on the forefront of it. Those who are not taking this seriously will get penalized short-term and long-term.
Right. Yeah, I absolutely love that. And just a quick shout out to all the folks who are tuning in. Really appreciate all the folks joining in. We've got Shivam, Gangwar. Good to see you, Shivam. We've got some other folks, Easy Gains and Profit Skettle. We also have on TikTok and LinkedIn and Facebook. I see Jesse as well as Emil and others across all platforms. Thank you for joining in. We're here with a special guest, Dr. Katrina, talking all things future tech, especially cybersecurity, since she has a master's in cybersecurity and engineering. So really getting into that, as someone who is considering an audit for their company, they always say there's kind of like that hurricane effect. The hurricane is coming, the natural disaster is going to be there, Red Cross and disaster relief funding is going to be needed. That people are going to die. But so many businesses, organizations, companies, and even individuals never really truly prepare for that quote unquote catastrophic act of God event. So I'm just curious, how do you communicate the real danger or the risk that's associated with not being, quote, quantum security ready, and add that urgency so that we don't have another CrowdStrike issue where half of the internet goes down, or Netflix and Amazon are down because CAPTCHA codes aren't working, or Target, gets a credit card risk, or Sony has all of the credit cards at risk. I mean, between Sony and Target having a cybersecurity attack, obviously afterwards, they're always doing these reparations afterwards. It's going to mute you for a second. So you always have these after the fact instances of, oh yeah, let's repair the damage. Let's do customer communications. Let's do PR. Let's protect our PII. But for those companies who are tuning in today saying, oh yeah, we are investing in being quantum ready, how do you communicate that urgency with stakeholders and shareholders, especially when you talk about HNDL?
HNDL, handle your quantum risk. So harvest now, decrypt later. I humanize it and make sure that they're aware that it's a risk of today, not tomorrow. And it's not a risk that, the hype around this conversation is really frustrating for somebody like me and others who are in the cybersecurity industry, because we're all out there trying to build awareness that harvesting has been happening. I'll bring up an example, a major breach that occurred a couple years back, and Congress had to hear about it from the former director of CISA, Jen Easterly, and the director of FBI, where they were communicating the fact that the breach occurred that was called the Volt Typhoon. They were moving laterally into our critical infrastructure. So we're talking about utilities, water systems, all of the various essentials for our humanity, our civilization, our needs, our necessities, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and they were living off the land. Well, why would they be living off the land? Well, harvesting, so that when that information, once quantum is viable, they would be able to decrypt that information. So harvest now, decrypt later. So that is a today risk. It's been happening. We don't know what the repercussions and ramifications later on will be. And hence why I believe that in our country today, we've prioritized. I'll give you a quick story. I was at last year at the Congressional Quantum Consortium with the congressional leaders talking about this, specifically how the United States has prioritized quantum from an economic standpoint. And in the room, a very small room, there were companies from the IBMs all the way through the D waves, which were, if you're familiar with the quantum companies that are publicly traded, there are many of them that are now on the that are publicly traded, and they were in the room. And we were having a discussion about what does that mean, prioritizing quantum here in the United States? Well, we are competing. Most people may not understand, but this is a national security and also an economic piece. So the administration just put out an executive order in February that prioritizes quantum from an economic standpoint. I reviewed that executive order closely just a couple days ago and looked at the fact that it's focused on economics and PQC, so post-quantum cryptography, the risk side of it, where encryptions will be, once quantum is viable, broken, to be able to get that asset and decrypt it, the assets we're talking about, the information, the private information that we don't want out there, that was not in the executive order. So it talked about the economics, but not the national security element of it. So I'm a believer that you don't sit around waiting for government and regulatory folks to tell you you have to do something. You should get in front of that risk, because the last thing you want to do is sit on your hands with this and say it's a future problem. And then boom, now you're faced with decryption and your private information and your secret sauces are out there. And what are you going to do at that point? So long story short, it's a risk of today. And I always emphasize, what does that mean to you? If your information gets put out there today, you wake up that morning as a CEO of a company or as a board, and your fiduciary obligation was to prepare and you did not, how are you going to address that to the public? How are you going to address that to your constituents? So you shouldn't wait for the government to take care of stuff. You should be the fiduciary of your own entity and organization and board, and take that. That is a responsibility you've signed up for.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I read something really interesting that's related called the overview effect. And what I love about the overview effect is that there's this idea that astronauts from space, actually, they see the Earth from a third-person perspective, and an astronaut view of existentialism is triggered by something called the overview effect. The overview effect is a significant cognitive shift from seeing Earth from space. And what it does is it blends awe and fragility together with a sense of unity, stripping away political borders and really revealing the planet as this tiny, fragile, and interconnected home, often which leads to intense feelings of responsibility, of compassion, and a desire to protect humanity. Because as a whole, humanity is what really connects each of us, no matter where you are from, where you were raised, your national citizenship, or your personal preferences. This idea of this overview effect, or what we would call the from space humanity effect, can be very relatable to quantum technology. And so I want to shift over to our second topic, which I'm very excited about: strategic capital for emerging technology. Of course, we're called funding, faith, and future tech. So how advisors support founders beyond writing checks. Yes, capital and resources are so important, but I'm curious, what is your approach on advisorship, and how do you actually advise startups beyond just writing checks?
I am an advisor to companies in the space of emerging tech, from quantum, cyber, AI. I hand select the founders and ideas, right? It's the founders I'm investing my time in as an advisor. And you know, what's interesting is I've noticed a difference between the founders who are first-time founders and those who've had previous exits and or who have founded other companies. Experience is everything. And I think when you have those certain types of experiences, you now know what challenges, what kind of other founders to work with, what kind of advisory role boards, et cetera, to build. And the challenge I'm seeing with the first-time founders is a lot of the times they come in, they're so excited about the idea. They have a product that they've created. and they, the energy's there, and they have this domain expertise, they have this experience that they're, prideful of, as they should be, and they come in, and it's challenging work that maybe they don't have experience in previously, and so they have this ideology of what that's going to be, and they dive in. And so when they're building their advisory boards to bring on advisors, I've noticed that at times they bring on people because, remember, capital, there's typically scarcity, especially in the pre-seed rounds. And so they'll bring advisors who are going to maybe provide certain services in return of some equity as an advisor. So I've seen founders who have worked for the Microsofts and the Apples and the, mega companies, and they come in with, I was a vice president of so-and-so in the space or whatnot, and they believe that it should go in a certain way when they haven't been an actual startup founder. And so they pick people for these advisory roles who, not that there's necessarily anything wrong with the people they're picking, it's that advisory seats are supposed to be meant for those who are going to really contribute. They're additive. They're going to contribute tangibles to the company, from whether it's a bottom line, whether it's a network, whether they're going to be covering your blind spots that maybe you lack in, because nobody, as we know it, is perfect, and no one's going to have all the right experiences. And having a startup and being a founder, I've been one myself, actually. So I'm speaking from some of that experience. I've been a co-founder and have worked with others as well. And the challenges are going to be there in so many ways. So you want to have an advisory board you can turn to that has the complementary skill sets that maybe you don't and your founders don't. And you want to respect their time. You want to listen to them. So these are people who have maybe previously been founders successfully. These are people who have a network that you don't and your founders don't. These are people who are able to look at your blind spots and guide you. And in return, what are they really getting? Because your equity is really worth nothing unless you succeed. And as we know, not all startups, succeed. There's a very small percentage that even get to a point where their equity is worth anything. So their time, their value, they see a potential in you as a founder or a co-founder. And they want to know that their time and their words are respected in this, that you are actually compounding on their time, meaning you are listening to them first and foremost, and you're pushing aside your ego and your pride. And so you're valuing what they're bringing as an advisor, not just the checks, but their actual wisdom, because 9 out of 10 times it's their wisdom that will get you to the next phase of this.
Yeah, I love that. Especially as an advisor, and I've advised a couple of startups, but mostly in the founder and product-led space. So I appreciate your wisdom on the advisor side, as well as representing not only advisors, but those who are shareholders, investors, and fiduciaries for a business. And Doctor, what I'm really hearing you say is that there needs to be a real wisdom-driven focus on quantum. And that's one way that you help advise businesses beyond capital, is you come in with a quantum and security perspective that says, hey, look, today it is a risk. Tomorrow it will be here at full scale. We'll see full attacks. Global economy will be driven on security. So for those investors and other angels, as well as founders who are tuning into the show and also watching the post show, how does one start to integrate their business with you and your team?
Yeah, absolutely. So through KR Advisory Ventures, I actually do advise and consult in the space. And I have a very large team through Queen's Gambit, great folks, extensive knowledge, lots of success. And we select, as I mentioned previously, companies that we're going to work with closely to contribute where we see the gaps. So a lot of early stage, startup founders typically look for accelerators and incubators and so forth. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, as long as it complements, it's a good fit and you have that opportunity, but not everyone will. And I think as innovation accelerates, as our risk landscape, our attack surface continues to grow. For example, in I formerly co-founded a startup company in the cybersecurity space during my doctorate. program at the same time, which I highly recommend. Don't ever do that. If you like your sleep and you like having a little free time, it's the worst combination you could do. But I learned a lot, and it definitely put me out there, and I can come back to the table with the companies I advise today and provide that guidance and the failures that I saw and or endured, to bring that back to those advisors is a very big value added component. So don't look for just folks that are, again, they've held certain types of high level jobs in corporate America. Look for the ones who've failed. Look for the ones who have failed and then succeeded. Look for the ones who have the courage, the tenacity, can sell, right? Have the network. And so those are the ones who are going to really bring that type of value, especially in the emerging tech spaces where you see a lot of CEOs of these companies that are technical. They should be CTOs, not CEOs, because at the end of the day, when you're assessing who should be the CEO, it should be the person who can sell, who can really passionately sell, show up, be out there, and really address the problem from a humanity angle. And I think that is what alignment is. And I think investors, especially at the pre-seed to seed stage, they're not looking at you and saying, oh, this is the product. I'm investing in the product. They're investing in you. If they do invest in you, they want to know that when it gets tough, rough, you're going to stick around and you're going to drive it forward. So I advise those founders who think out of the box, who are creative, and who have a passion for the space and who are actually addressing real world problems, not the idea of. So I like proof of concept. I like stories that are tied to it. I don't want to invest in something because it's another AI company, or when I say invest my time, resources, my network. It's going to be the companies that actually are going to have a real impact, and it's validated. Again, having a doctorate in engineering, I would say, what I learned from that, aside from having something that I can go out there and apply and make a difference in, is I had to sell it to a board, right? I had to sell it to my defense committee. I had to validate it. I had to have a proof of concept, in a sense. I had a lot of things I had to do that led me to the point of having and earning this doctorate. And then same kind of concept and philosophy. That's what a startup is. A startup isn't a job. And what shocks me the most, David, and I'm sorry I'm going on, I told you this was one of my favorite topics. What shocks me the most about this is that both on the VC, on the investment side, as well as the founder side, it seems to be a misalignment and even a trust issue. Let me, if you don't mind me, I'll dive right into really quickly what I mean by that. So the misalignment is that the founders sometimes think, I have this great product, and so once I have the MVP, it's going to raise the money. Like, I'm going to have the capital. And they're thinking like everybody else. I like founders who actually think differently. Prove to me that you've put the time into it. And some founders, when they come from the corporate side, they think, oh, well, I should have a salary, or I should, be compensated for my time, and I stop at 5 o'clock. That's not what the startup world is about. If you're really going to commit yourself to this space, this is life-changing. This is going to be all you're going to end up thinking and obsessing over. It's almost an addiction you end up, getting in the space. And those are the founders that I draw to the most, who are that passionate. But I also believe in balance, because if you're not taking care of yourself as a founder, if you're not balancing yourself in a healthy manner, how long are you going to really survive in the space? Your fuel will be out before you know it. So a lot of that misalignment and also self-care and the compassion piece also goes back to the self too. Now, on the VC side or on the investor side, one of the reasons why I really am passionate about being here, as someone who's got, like you mentioned, the domain expertise, as well as the experience being a founder myself, and being out there and talking about these topics and areas that a lot of people maybe don't understand. I've dedicated myself to the space, and this has become a more of a purpose-driven mission for me because of the times we're in. And I've chosen to be here in the space because I'm also finding that a lot of the VCs and And investors also don't have necessarily the domain expertise. They know what they know, they're good at what they're good at, and maybe they have had some really great wins with certain companies and founders. But in an emerging space that's moving this fast, and it's multifaceted, so it's the regulatory side and global geopolitics involved. We're competing with China on this, but then there's the PQC national security element. There's so much right now happening and in the space that we need to have domain experts in the space to help guide even those investors, to sit at the table and have them think out of the box about it too. Just because you typically do this, and this doesn't mean the same benchmarks apply in the space of innovation. We need to be investing back into our own companies here in the United States. We need to be pushing innovation forward to both from an economic standpoint and national security, compete and also protect our nation. So I'm very passionate for both of those reasons, and I love to bring that knowledge and experience to these founders. So thanks for letting me get that off my chest.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love it. And that's the whole point of the David Daily Show, is to bring you on as a guest, but also to highlight your expertise. And you mentioned PQC a couple times. I just want to bring everyone along on this journey. What is PQC? What does that actually mean in the context of quantum and technology risk?
Yeah, so PQC stands for post-quantum cryptography. So today, and great question. Sorry, sometimes I get carried away.
No, it's good. So post-quantum cryptography. So as you adjust yourself there, just want to make sure that we're aligned here on that as well, so people understand that as well. What exactly does post-quantum cryptography mean?
Yeah, sorry, my laptop decided to kind of shut down there for a second. So PQC, post-quantum cryptography, today, computers that we use today, we have classical encryptions. And once quantum becomes viable, because today the quantum computers are not in use. So this is why we say once quantum is viable, we have all these risks, right, with handle and so forth. So once it's viable, our classical encryptions that we use to encrypt our data, our secret sauces, PII, et cetera, are going to be breakable. So PQC stands for post-quantum. So once quantum is viable, having encryptions that are not breakable anymore. So NIST has put out a few algorithms there that this past year that are PQC algorithms, and a big element of it, and I know again I'm throwing terminology here, is crypto agility. And again, in my framework, the governance framework for quantum queen framework that I've come up with, takes into consideration both NIST and the standards, as well as crypto agility being a big element of it, because we want to make sure that the algorithms, the encryption, how we encrypt, they're not going to be a rip and replace situation, because that is not only really expensive, but they're also very difficult for entities and organizations of all sizes to do. So we want to make sure that their post-quantum cryptography, PQC, is something that everyone's aware of and they're able to shift to. And the standards are requiring today that by 2030, 2035, I believe, that implementation has to be done. So the government has come out with those types of standards, with requirements that we shift over. I think it's, should be sooner. And at Davos recently, the CEO of IBM, he came out and said that, the viability of these quantum computers is really more of a 3+ years out. So if that's actually true, and if you believe that it could be, again, don't focus on the timeline because you're going to drive yourself crazy. Focus on what you can control, which is preparing, right? Having the frameworks, preparing, right, and transitioning today.
Yeah, I like that. I like the idea of quantum agility, and just putting that on screen here for folks, especially those who are in engineering and with the rapid nature of technology. Quantum agility is something to consider, especially as we're seeing hybrid workloads. You mentioned classical architecture, right? We love classical architecture for many reasons. But we also see too that in the quantum agility world, from a quantum agile point of view, we're seeing that even companies like NVIDIA, Meta, Google, Microsoft, and many other organizations are actually prioritizing these hybrid workloads where you have your classical architecture, meaning you have computers in big warehouses performing at scale. Of course, you now have these GPUs or these graphical processing units kind of sitting in that in between stage. We just have all these GPUs driving compute and graphical processing, not only for crypto, but also for AI workloads and data science and machine learning and agentic. But then on top of that, as we look to the future, you have these very modular quantum processors that are coming in to be much more efficient in quantum concepts and quantum computing. Now, if you're just brand new to quantum agility or quantum computing, go listen to our previous episodes. We educate you early on in episodes 1 through 10 on quantum basics. You can find that on Apple Podcast, on Spotify, on Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and YouTube, and all major platforms. Thankfully to our production company behind the scenes. Shout out to Reveting. If you're considering going live on LinkedIn or any other platform, definitely work with Reveting. They're a phenomenal company and team. And that will help you actually get quantum ready, is to know where your data is and how it's being distributed and to create safety and security. And so as you see these modular workloads coming in, and even we're seeing these small modular nuclear power modular being added to traditional data centers, we know that quantum security is going to be very, very important. And to your point about stewardship, as we get into our third topic here, our third topic is really about stewardship and going beyond just capital and going beyond just the technology, but really understanding that hybrid responsibility and the stewardship, especially from a conviction point of view, in terms of how we actually think about going beyond the technology risks. So how do you be a good steward in a time like this where the quantum risk is already here? That's the purpose of this show, is to highlight that. How do you actually still be a good steward and prepare for the responsibility that's required in a highly risky environment that is already here? For us, it's already here. For the majority of late maturity founders that will be here tomorrow. But how do you really prepare for that, Doctor?
Great question. Actually, as you were sharing that, I was just thinking about a couple of things. One, going back to the startups and founders, even recently with my experience I've had from pitches and decks and so forth, I always ask if there is any encryption or anything that goes on, in the product that is being presented. What kind of security? How are they preparing for, the situation with their, is it encrypted? Is it PQC? So I always tell advisors, founders, as an advisor, and as even not as an advisor, even when I go out there and speak about this topic, that you have to change with the times. One of my sayings, one of my favorite terminologies, if you're not familiar with it, is the Red Queen effect. So if you recall Alice in Wonderland, through the looking glass or something, whatever that was called. Sorry if I'm mixed the terminology of that up. But when Alice was running, and if you recall, the cards flying from underneath her feet, but she was stagnant. She was running, but she was stagnant. She wasn't moving forward, and the queen was catching up. So if you don't change with the times, how do you expect to keep up with your competition or with your adversaries? So I'm a believer that, the emerging tech space, even if you're out there pitching your product, your whatever it is you're doing, make sure that you're incorporating the security element of it. It should not be an afterthought. And that's one of our biggest frustrations, I think, in cybersecurity. As David, you may nod your head, or you may say, yeah, this is not new to us. So I'm a believer of secure by design. Even when I was a founder, I actually was in a space of making sure that our product was about hardening IoTs. And so what does that mean? IoTs, Internet of Things, anything that basically connects to the internet, right? So smart devices. And as we all know, I'm sure you have plenty of smart devices in your home. I have them. We all have them. And it's only growing. And with that comes a growing attack surface. So when we have these types of smart devices in our homes, I always, I like to ask the question, if you're putting out a product, are you prioritizing the security? Well, why is that an important question? Not just as an advisor, board member, fiduciary obligation, et cetera. We're putting out products in our country when national security is at stake. And we're not securing them because it's not mandated in this country. UK and Europe, they've mandated this. And they require that if you're going to sell any of these devices, that they have to be hardened. Well, in the United States, that's not a thing. Obviously, there's a cost to these things. Companies don't necessarily see an ROI in it. But as a board and as a CEO of companies that are putting out these products, and you're putting these in people's homes and they're in the communities, that should be a responsibility, a fiduciary obligation of your company, that you choose to make sure that these products, before they're ever unboxed, are actually secure. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice to our country. You're doing a disservice to our communities, to families, knowingly, right? Knowingly.
Right.
So I think that element of it is extremely important to be present to. And earlier you were asking me, how do you go out there and educate or speak to the boards and so forth? I ask them questions. I ask them, would you want this in your home? Would you be okay with devices that are not secure opened up, so that you were putting not just your assets in your community, but lateral movement? Again, I was mentioning Volt Typhoon earlier, the breach that occurred, sitting in our critical infrastructure. Well, how do you think they got there? Through these IoT devices, through these legacy systems that were not secure or not being patched any longer because they're no longer mandated to be patched. So all of these things cause certain breaches that will end up shutting down our power, our water, our, human lives are at stake. This isn't about an ROI for a company. It is, but that's not the important part. It's the human element of it. So stewardship, conviction, all of these things we're talking about, for me, it's about alignment. And also it's about being stewards for our communities. The decisions we make affect all of us globally.
Yeah, that's so good. I absolutely love that. And here's a perfect opportunity for us to do a quick shout out to AI and Faith. So I participate in a nonprofit called AI and Faith, which is a pluralistic, religious, and faith-based organization bringing the world's wisdom to AI ethics and morality. And what you're tapping into is really that ethical question to say, are you considering the stewardship and humanity risks by not investing into quantum security? And it's more of a moral and humanity question than it is an ROI or a profit-focused New York Stock Exchange type of a conversation. So I'm curious, just to stay in the theme of the show, funding, faith, and future tech, what role does faith play in your life and spirituality as you're thinking about these types of conversations?
I love that question, actually. I think that for me personally, I grew up, I'm Iranian American, Iranian born, raised in the United States. English was my third language as a child. And there is an element of acceptance for all. My father, my parents made sure that when I was growing up, I was immersed with all religions and so forth, and got to experience all of that at a young age so that I can have empathy, acceptance as I grew up, because they wanted that for me, considering what's going on in Iran today and what is happening in the world. It is gut-wrenching to see what humanity, how much devastation is out there in these parts of the world, and all they're doing is trying to fight for their voice and for democracy. And so for somebody like me, when you bring up faith, for me, faith isn't just a religion. It's standing up for each other. It's humanity. It's doing the right thing to push progress forward for the right reasons, for impact. And so it's very near and dear to my heart for these messages to be out there. I mean, we have to stand up for each other. We have to have a voice in the space. Our freedom doesn't just matter here in the United States, it matters globally. And as a woman as well in the space, my parents didn't give everything up to make sure that their children, their daughter, their firstborn was in the United States to be able to have these opportunities. I wouldn't be here making a difference the way I am. So as an immigrant myself, being here and creating, an impact. This isn't a one-off story. This is, yes, the American dream, as they say, but this isn't a one-off story. There are a lot of me and a lot of us out there that are really striving to create the impact in our country and in our world. And so I'm a believer that, through my parents and through the nurture and nature experiences, obviously, that I've had, that acceptance is a big part of it. And that alignment for me is everything. So being in this field and having this purpose within itself is very spiritual for me.
I absolutely love that. And my mother was actually a beautiful Korean immigrant before she went on from this world. So I do have a tender place, not only for immigrants, but also for mothers, which you are also a mother. It's just one of the kind of roles or hats that you play. And I love your perspective on faith as well, saying that, look, hey, I'm an Iranian American, and I know that there are geopolitical and economical issues that are kind of beyond the scope of this show. We stay apolitical, but yeah, it definitely affects it because there's culture there. We're both dark, right? Dark haired, so people kind of know that we're not exactly that blonde hair, light skinned American necessarily. But those values play a huge role in the way that you advise and show up. So I'm glad that you're highlighting that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have an appreciation for those who maybe didn't have the resources to be out there and be founders, but they've chosen to. Immigrants, people of color, women, minorities. So I'm a big advocate for all of this. So being in the space, even though it's a field of emerging tech and engineering, I mean, the diversity matters because all of our creative thinking comes together to make a big difference. And being part of an organization like Civilian Reserve, for example, for me, we have an amazing board of people who have done some tremendous work from both the military side. We have major generals who are on my board. And as a chairwoman, as a steward, I give my time to this nonprofit to lead us in the right direction to make our world a better place. Cybersecurity, as you're aware, is now, from a critical infrastructure perspective, a state issue. The executive order last year came out saying that states have to take on their own cybersecurity for their critical infrastructure. So this coming fall, I've taken the initiative to partner with ICS Village and Critical Effect DC to have Critical Effect California, to connect DC to California coastal, right? Bi-coastally, and be able to bring that here in California because we're one of the largest economies in the world, and we're required to, and we should be, focused on making sure our critical infrastructure is secure. So being as involved as I can be, I've decided to dedicate my time to this and have some great people, some great organizations partner with us this coming fall in September in Sacramento, California, a couple blocks from the state capitol, to have these very difficult conversations, to bring all the different entities, organizations, people, decision makers, leaders, elected officials to show up and take that initiative to make sure we're better prepared for the purpose of the greater humanity, right?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I love your perspective and the way that you're focused,
Thank you.
especially in your mission. And yeah, it really resonates with me as well. And look, this has been a really amazing show. We have just a couple minutes left. So without further ado, I do want to shout out just a couple folks who have joined us. I see Norlin and Tom and Carla and Billy, Caroline and Rob Bacayao. Come on, Rob, see you on there, as well as many other folks joining us. And so this is our special area, special segment. We have a special segment called Beyond the Bag. And it's an anchor segment where we look into your bag or your purse and see, what do you travel with? And so, Doctor, I've got my item in my hand. We've prepped you briefly. It's going to be a surprise like it always is. So I'm just curious, Dr. Katrina, what do you always carry in your purse or in your bag when you're traveling?
Well, I don't have my bag next to me, so and I know we're about to be out of time, so I won't go running around looking for it. Aside from having snacks, because I love to snack, which is one of my favorite, on the go things to do, because I get lectured about making sure I eat and take care of myself. Remember, self care is a big thing here when you're out there trying to make a difference in the world. I carry a fan in my bag that people make fun of me for because I'm shameless about just pulling it out on an airplane or being on the go and having it on me just to feel refreshed. And so in there, I've got one of those little liquid things you can pour in there. So one of my favorite scents is eucalyptus. So I kind of put a little bit of eucalyptus in there. And so when you turn on the fan and have that freshing, so it gives me that feeling of rejuvenation and it takes me to be present to that moment. And so one of the oddest things I carry that friends and family make fun of me for is I carry a little handheld fan. So I don't know if that
Nice.
that resonates with folks, but hey, that helps me.
I love it. Yeah, it's unique and it's different and it's perfect because no one has ever told us that they carry a eucalyptus fan with them. So yeah, that's very much
Good
California,
idea.
very much American. Like, hey, we lived in a privileged country that we have a fan that could just bask in the wind with. So today I'm actually carrying a comb. I have a long comb with thick sides and thin sides. We both have long hair, so I'm
Yes,
constantly combing on the
you have
road
great
and
hair.
actually cutting my hair as well. Yes,
Great.
now what I need is I need that eucalyptus fan to blow in the
Yeah,
wind. So funny.
I call it the champagne problems, right? The moments where you want to just feel a little bit, the word is bougie, and you pull that out and we're right there.
Wonderful. I love it. You're having fun with it. Okay. So as we come to a close, just real quick for folks who are watching, we still have over 25 people watching on all major platforms. So Dr. Katrina, it was a pleasure to have you today. What is the best way for people to stay connected with you? And who are the ideal people that you really serve and how do you actually serve them?
Thank you for that question. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. I write for a lot of various publications at times. I contribute to Fast Company and various outlets, and it's all over my LinkedIn. I usually post regularly on there. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn, Dr. Katrina Rosseini. I don't know if we can add that to the my profile to the chat here, but that's a great way to connect with me. Additionally, as far as the kind of folks I work with VCs and the smart money side, investment banks, VCs, and those who actually want a domain expertise of mine to be part of their team at some capacity, to advise, to work with them on looking at the technologies, innovation, and the founders who are going to make the real difference, who are going to have that impact. So that's one area. Secondly, I am also consulting with founders, and typically the seed plus stage is what I look closely at. Doesn't mean I'm not going to look at the pre-seed stage, but typically seed plus stage. And I work with those folks, and thank you so much for putting that up. I work with those folks with anything ranging from obviously advisory work, consulting, guidance on go-to-market strategies, all the way through connecting to the networks that they don't have, being part of the team at various capacities, and consulting with them even on their business development strategies that they may not be thinking out of the box on. And so, like I said, working with those that complement you and also guide you and have the experience. So reach out to me if you do have any questions. Thank you again for having me on the show. It's been a pleasure. I love our conversations and the topics, and good luck, David, with everything, and keep doing the great work you're doing.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we're going to close the show out. It's been a pleasure having another guest on the David Daily Show, where we go live and have special segments, especially like today, where we focus on funding, faith, and future tech. What a pleasure to have a special guest on the show. So I just want to say, please tune in to our next show. We have a guest every week, and in between, we go live daily on all major platforms. Please like our content, subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and tune in tomorrow. And if there was a piece that really spoke to you, either during live or in post, feel free to comment and promote yourself, meet other people in the chat, in the comments, and build a community together, because life is so incredibly short and we're so incredibly blessed to be here. So tune in next time. See you on the David Daily. Over and out.